Welcome to Indie Innovators, your backstage pass to the ever-evolving universe of indie game development. Imagine sitting down for coffee with the minds behind those games you can't stop playing, hearing firsthand about their late-night breakthroughs, the almost gave-up moments, and those bursts of inspiration that came when least expected. But we're also not here to just talk about success stories. We're also here to get real, to talk about the nitty-gritty parts of indie game development, which is exactly what we're doing in this episode more than we've ever done before, because James and myself have sat down to make our very first video game. And the first step in that process is to brainstorm our game idea. I'm new to the industry. I've never done this before, but James has worked with all sorts of different teams through this process. And so he has a whole ton of insights to help us learn how to brainstorm our first video game. This is the longest episode that's been recorded yet, and for good reason. There is a lot more work that goes into brainstorming a video game than I expected it would be. I thought it would just be a simple process of, hey, let's make a video game. This is the stuff I like. Cool, we've got our idea. Let's go for it. But no, there's a lot more steps. So many steps, in fact, that this is only the first of several episodes to come out on just the brainstorming of our first video game. And thankfully, James is here to help guide me through this. I'm coming into this with I shouldn't say absolutely no background. We went to school together for 3D game animation. So I have what I would consider bare minimum basic knowledge of how to do 3D modeling. And I don't think there's, if anything, things in the industry might have adjusted and shifted, and I have less than bare minimum knowledge. But that's pretty much all I have coming into this, besides loving video games, playing them my entire life, and just always dreaming of making a video game for myself. Yeah, I don't really know how else to put it.
Yeah, making that transition to game player to game maker.
How about yourself, James?
Well, I mean, for those who are familiar with us by now, I've been in the industry for like 10 years. What we're attempting to do here, which I think I'm excited for it because I've worked on a lot of large scale stuff, right? Things that require teams, require a lot of planning, require like years of development. And it'll just be kind of nice to go take a step back, like start from the beginning and be like, okay, you know what? No, let's approach this fresh. Like it's day one again. Like, what does this look like?
Yeah, going indie.
Yeah.
So James, who are you as a gamer? What kind of games do you like playing? What's been piquing your interest lately?
Who am I as a gamer? I'm a gamer that is no longer a gamer normally. Right? I'm a designer gamer. So what I think about that is I'm somebody who hops into a game. I play all the mechanics until I understand how they work. I figure out in my head roughly how I assume it was made, and then when I'm satisfied with that, I typically don't play the game anymore. So I don't play for the story. I don't play for that's not why I'm there, right? Is the experience. I'm there to figure it out. It's a puzzle. So that's who I am as a gamer. So like my library is filled with anything and everything. Anytime somebody has a recommendation, there's like a viral game, so like a new game mechanic come out, I'll buy it, and then the extent of my playtime is until I figure that out. But that's not always the case. There are some games that stick. So.
What can you give an example of one that stuck recently?
Recently was Satisfactory. I think because it was the constant introduction and almost re-optimization. If anybody is playing that game, every time you're given like a new piece of the puzzle and it changes all the other pieces, and you're like, oh, okay, well now I can tinker with this. And so it was like a constant, fresh engagement of how things worked and how you could continue to approach challenges in that game. And that one really stuck for a long time. But the genre overall that I think that really pulls me in the longest would be survival games. So your Ark, Nightingale, pretty much all of those, right? Like that's kind of where I sit, because it's room to tinker and play test with mechanics that are dynamic in nature. So that's always appealing to me, is like, oh, how can I break this? How does this work? What happens if I do this? And survival games as a genre have the biggest scope for that. So that's kind of where I'm hooked.
For myself, it's really hard to pick one specific thing. I think as a gamer myself, I fit right into the variety category, where I love little bits of everything. But I feel like I can set two kind of pillars of where most of my gaming ends up going towards eventually, and it's problem solving and storytelling. And like problem solving, I love anything where I'm trying to exactly like you, James, tinkering, figuring out how things work, trying to move things around. You know, Satisfactory has been something I've been into a lot lately. But I also really lean towards story, and it's not always story within video games. Like I really enjoy good story games, but I also really enjoy the sandbox games that allow me to just create my own stories. Like I've recently I got addicted to Kenshi again, and so it's an open world survival game where out in the wasteland, and I just start a new game. I create a couple characters. I come up with in my mind the backstory of how they got there, and then I just play out the events. And it's like I just enjoy crafting the narrative as we go. Just like sometimes when I was younger, I would play Grand Theft Auto and I would just pretend it's an MMO as if I'm one of the characters running around and all the other NPCs are actually just other players. And I would just, it's I don't know, it's just, I've always really enjoyed that kind of level. So when you get something that mixes the two of them, like Kenshi, for example, then it really just hooks me in. So I think that's the best kind of way I could describe myself as a gamer. So, James, why do you think most people get stuck trying to think of the perfect idea when it comes to building a game?
Well, I mean, I have a few opinions on why, but I'm curious to hear what you think as somebody who's freshly trying to step into this role.
I think there's this fantasy to do with the perfect game, where in your mind you have these expectations. I should even speak for myself. In my mind, I have the idea of what a perfect game is that I would love to make someday. And it's something that I could spend hundreds of hours planning and working on, because it's almost like chasing the dream of it is more exciting than actually figuring out what will work and what won't work and starting to put it all together. And I think that's why a lot of people get stuck on the perfect idea. And it's because it's this fantasy in their head of what they would like to see. And so they keep playing in that fantasy playground of what it could be instead of actually pushing forward with it and making it physically.
Okay, that was a really good answer. Yeah, no, like you definitely got it pretty dead on. Making the game is often, right? Like once you're past the initial concepts and like ideas and you start making it and things are working and now you're in a position where like you have a prototype and you have to actually start making the game. That's often less fun than actually doing all that stuff beforehand. So you get trapped in this cycle, like you hinted at there, of I'm just gonna I'm gonna get stuck in concept hell, right? Where like I'm just gonna forever concept ideas, and because you never actually transition as a developer into just finishing an idea, you develop a little bit and you're like, but this wasn't as fun as that thing I was doing before. So I'm going to go back because I seem to be really passionate about that. I'm going to like develop another feature. I'm going to develop this other part that fits into that dream, right? The dream game. And that's where it's often the biggest trap for first time developers. Apologies. Where, yeah, like it just becomes development hell. Your scope gets blown way out of proportion. You just keep adding more and more to the pot, not because you're like trying to build the best game. It's because you can't just finish it, right? You can't finish what you started. Like you just want to keep starting things.
Do you think that comes down to personality as well? Because this isn't the perfect analogy, and I might be missaying it, but there's like the architect versus the engineer, where there's the one that their passion is designing, and then there's the other one that's passion is building. And so the designer will love to design things and will never actually get around. Well, I mean, again, this is just an example, but the designer will get around to designing things and never actually working on it because they love the designing process versus the other side that actually loves the doing process, which is where you get a lot of different styles of games, where there's some indie games where people have all this planning and preparation going into ahead of time. And then there's other people where you'll be like, hey, what are you making? They're like, I don't really know, but I'm just putting the stuff together and seeing what happens.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I met somebody who was one of the founders for Club Penguin like years back. and they told me about this spectrum. It was the first time I ever heard it. And I'm sure it's not new. It's probably been around for forever, but there's a spectrum of like 0 to 100. And if 0 is pure creativity, right? Like just pulling ideas out of the air and being like, what if this, what if that, right? And 100 is like super task oriented people who are like, if you think about all the jobs you take when you're a kid and they're like, do you like repetitive tasks? Can you do the same thing every day over and over and over again? Right? Like that's 100. That spectrum and where you sit on it between creativity and just like getting stuff done, that's the game industry too, right? And when you're a designer, it's tough to figure out, first of all, where you sit personally, because you know self analysis is hard. But yeah, like you have the types who, as we already alluded to, who are very creative. So when it comes time to actually finishing and getting stuff done, they can't do it, right? They get to that point and it's very difficult. So they go to what they're good with, constantly coming up with new creative ideas. But you also have the opposite end, right? Where you have somebody who's more on like the higher 50 to 100 end, who is all about just, oh, you have a problem and a solution. Let me just like tinker and get it done. And I'm just going to like check off my little checklist and get it all done like super quick because I don't have to think about it. I just have to execute. Not that not thinking is bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that they're way more efficient at saying, this is what I need to do, and this is how I get it done. I'm going to go through and like get this all done. So those types of people are, like you said, very good at just implementing, good at executing on things, but they're not good at design, right? They're not good at at I shouldn't say not the design, the creative design. They're not good at coming up with unique ideas or fun things. So often they end up with just kind of like a hodgepodge thing of a game that runs. It's just not very fun because none of it is really a cohesive game. It's just a bunch of features, right?
Yeah, and we should make sure to mention too that we're speaking in very generalized terms here. So
yes,
we're not saying that because you're good at one thing, you might not be good at the other. You know, there are lots of people out there that are great at both. So
yeah, exactly. And you know, there are plenty of people who are on like the tips of both ends and can't handle the middle of that spectrum where I talked about, where like they can come up with a creative idea and solution for something and they're really good at following a plan that's been laid out, but how to come up with that plan in the middle bits, that's where they struggle, and you know, vice versa. So yeah, it's very general.
I don't remember who told me this. I'm pretty sure it was one of our instructors when we were going to school years and years ago, but they said that the best ideas when it comes to making video games typically aren't always the ones that make it across the finish line. And so like we're going through here to make a video game. Maybe we'll make the best game. You never know. I hope we do. But we never know what'll happen. And just because we create an idea for a video game and we make it the best idea possible, it doesn't mean it's going to make it there. So at least for the way I interpreted it, what was told to me was that sometimes you just got to make it. It doesn't have to be something that's going to be a AAA blow everybody out of the water. It's you just have to get it across the finish line, and that's really the only thing that matters. I mean, eventually down the line, I'm sure it's a little bit more complicated than that, but you know, that's, I don't know. I thought it's something that's really stuck with me for a long time. So
I remember hearing that too. I can't remember who told us that either, but it's very true to life, right? Not just games. It's so many people get hung up on the how to or doing it right. They just don't do it at all, and you just have to start, get it done, try again, and then you know. This is that wall we previously talked about, where you just got to keep running at it, and eventually things start to click, and you learn from your mistakes, and you get there. You can build good games. You can build great designs. You can build like your dream game. Eventually, it's just starting with the dream game is really hard.
James, for the game that we're going to be making today, well, not today. We're not just making it today, but we're planning today. What do you think are going to be some core things that we should prioritize for the game?
Well, you know, scope. It's one we hear often, right? Not just from us here Indie Innovators, but just across the industry, anybody who's talking to indies or how to get started, they always talk about scope creep. I think it'll be important for us to really show what that means. Like, how do you manage scope?
We've also talked about it a whole bunch of times, and still the word scope just sounds weird to me. And it's like, do I fully understand what it is? Not really, but I understand scope creep that we've talked about a bunch of different times, where more things just kind of work their way into the whole plan of stuff.
Yeah, and so I think as we're going, touching on that is probably going to be pretty important for whoever's following along or trying to do something similar, so that they get some context of what does that actually mean, right? How do you put that into practice?
I think for me, I really just want it to be simple, because we might get partway through the process, and then whatever genre we've chosen or thing we've decided to do, I might decide I hate this. This is miserable and I don't like it. And so I want it to be simple enough so that if that happens, I can still push through. Because ideally it's going to be a lot of fun to make this, but I'm fairly positive there's going to be many moments where I'm sitting there and learn, because I've never made a game before. I don't know what aspects of game production I'm going to enjoy. I know when we were learning 3D modeling, I know that I really enjoyed the initial modeling phase of it, but then going through and making sure all the topography was right, and making minor adjustments, and then adding, or I can't remember the term for it, but when you go and you like build the skeleton and then connect that, and then you have to like do whatever mesh painting or how, like, I hated that part beyond belief. And so I'm fairly positive there's going to be parts of this that I'm going to hate too. So simple so that I can get through and learn what I like and don't like about this.
Well, that's where having a accountability buddy comes in handy. So you can be like, yeah, this is what we got to do. This is where we said we were going to go. So give you that extra nudge.
What about inspiration? Do you have any inspiration, whether it's from like games, TV, movies, family life, that's been hitting you recently, where you're like, this is kind of giving me some ideas for video games that you've thought about bringing into this so far, to our first game together?
I mean, all the time. Right? You get those kinds of ideas all the time. Personally, I'm gonna try and stay away from the stuff I play, right? And I don't want to be influenced by big complex systems in games where I'm like, oh, this is a fun thing, but it's like super complicated, let alone for two people to try and deliver on. So I wanna keep that in mind. And I think that if you're anybody playing, listening to this and you want to follow along, be aware of that too. You don't want to think, I like Pokemon, I'm going to make a creature collecting game. Well, that's pretty high scope, right? And you don't necessarily want to be influenced by that. There's nothing wrong with that. You can make whatever version of some kind of creature collecting style game that you want. It's just, keep in mind that you're being influenced by a massive thing, right? So you have no idea how the mechanics necessarily work together. And then you could very well fall into that trap of, oh, well, I need to add this because this is what the genre does, right? I need to add this because this is how survival games work or collectible card games work. And if I don't have this, it's not going to be that type of genre. Like, that's a big trap. So like, I think that being inspired by a neat idea is one thing, but it should be from a place of inspiration, not guidance. So thinking something is cool and how could you do it differently? Great. Thinking about, I love how they did it, I want to do it too, except add on my personal flair. That's a little harder.
Why do you say that's harder?
I say it's harder because a lot of these bigger designs have had a lot of people working on them for a long time. So you are starting from where all those people left off when you think about it, except you weren't involved in the process. You don't know why they made certain decisions. You don't know if maybe they had similar ideas that you do that you think is great, but they went through like 6 months of development with a whole team and we're like, this was terrible, we're not going to include it, let's change the game design. Like, you don't know that because you weren't a part of it, right? So to start off where they left off takes a high degree of understanding of how all these different systems and like not just systems, but I mean in terms of development, right, artists, UI artists, user experience artists, analytical people, marketing people, business development, like not just the act of making games, but just as a business, you're missing that entire context. You just see the end result. Right?
So like if
Which
I
is
said, I really enjoyed The Witcher 3, but you know what'd be cool? This game, but I could also build houses and cut down trees.
yeah, like that's a huge unknown that you're getting, right? And I think a lot of people, let me rephrase that. I think a lot of gamers will take a game at face value. At face value, you could say, yeah, I hit this tree, I get some wood. That seems straightforward. I don't understand why, X number of complaints that you could find on any other game, right? Like, because that's the thought process. It's, I did a thing, this is what happened, this is so simple.
Yeah, just click and drag it in there.
But that may not be the case, right? There may be underlying systems that you don't understand how they work or why they work the way they do. So that what you did was not simply just, I hit tree, I got wood, right? And that's why it's hard, because now you're trying to add on to something that you think works the way you think it does. And if it doesn't, what you're trying to add on isn't going to work, because now you have to go back to the drawing board. This is separate, but this is another issue a lot of dream games run into, is they try to replicate things and add their flair, and then they realize, well, it's almost impossible to add the flair because we don't understand the basics. And so they get stuck going back and to the beginning and redesigning again and again as they learn more and more about how this game works. In pursuit of that inspiration, in pursuit of being able to add on their personal flair.
I think for myself, with the sources of inspiration I've been getting from lately, it's a lot more to do. Like, I tried to play a bunch of different games and watch a bunch of different kinds of shows and movies to see what might be kind of interesting and what I would like to make for a game. But there were no mechanics or anything that I felt inspired by. It was more of the tone. Like a show I've recently been watching for the first time, Golden Kamui, I think that's what it's called, which is an anime about this guy that returns from war in Japan, and now he's hunting down criminals so that all have these tattoos that have this location of a hidden gold that he's trying to find. It shows where to skin them so that you can take their human skin and turn it into a big map of where this treasure is hidden. And I don't know, just like, no, I don't want to do anything like that with like skinning people for a video game, but just like dark and gritty isn't the right word for it, but something more like intense and dangerous with the tone. Who knows? We'll see if that even comes to play in what we're making. So
never know. We'll find out.
So there's a few constraints that we have when, like, for the two of us, especially a lot of small studios find, and it's that there's only two of us. I have no experience making a video game before. And ideally, we would like for this project, at least especially personally for myself, I would like this to be a very learnable and finishable product, which I think that also is I think that's a safe thing to say, also kind of puts a little bit of constraints on what we're working on. Is there anything else that from your experience and knowledge that you can see as like constraints that you would like to put on the project yourself personally?
A little bit on the design, right? Whatever we get into for a concept here, there's certain engines or tool sets that are better. There's certain methods of doing something, whether or not we're going to do this game as 2D, right? All drawn and pixel art, or is it a side scroll, or is it something that requires 3D? All these things play into the scope and ultimately what you can develop. Alternatively, right, like you mentioned, dark and gritty. It's could be doable to do a dark and gritty narrative, a dark and gritty setting in a very simple game. We could just do a side scroller, or how about a interactive narrative, right? But deciding on that is going to influence how we end up making it long term. So it's just something to be aware of, that like really understanding what it is you want to make and what it is about it that you want to get right. And this we will be touching on this in the future, but like game pillars, like what's the essence of the game we're chasing here? Sometimes you end up developing something that you don't have the tools for, you don't have a process for, because there is none. All right, you got to make it, and that's a higher level of difficulty. But I'm just trying to illustrate that there really is no set bounds of how to do it, right? It's just a matter of what are we trying to make, and can we can we do it and finish it, like you said, and then figuring out what that process looks like. Not that we should be doing anything that requires like state of the art brand new plugin or something that we got to make. Like, we should not be doing that.
From your experience, then, how do you think the brainstorming session for this should start?
That's a tough one.
Because my first thought was, like, do we start with genre? Is that what we go with? Do we say, like, these are the kind of genres I'm thinking of doing? Or is that still too broad of a starting point? Is it more, do we need to think more like, what is it that we want people to experience? Are we doing something single player, multiplayer? Like, where, I don't know, James. I have no idea. My first thought was like, well, let's just go with genre.
Well, genre is hard, right? In business, there's this the 7 whys. I think it's 6 or 7. Don't quote me. I don't have the book open right now. But the idea is, for whatever you want to do, you ask why. Like, why this, and then why that, and then why that, and then why that, and then why that, and eventually you distill down to the very essence of whatever it is that you're trying to do, or it might be how. So I apologize. Like, how are we going to do this, and you distill it. So with that mindset, if you think genre, that's like first how, first why, right? It's very broad. As just thinking about it, like, horror. Well, yes, that's a much more indie friendly genre in terms of like being able to make it and finish it, but it's still super wide, right? Are you talking mascot horror? Are you talking interactive horror? Are you talking audio horror? Are you talking psychedelic horror? Like it's huge. So rather than genre, I think that some of the best ways I've seen from other developers, right, and people I've worked with, is to think very, very small. Like, what is fun? Well, like, what do you think is fun about Satisfactory? So I'll go first. I think the idea of watching numbers go up is a very commonly understood thing that makes us feel good. So in Satisfactory, when you're putting resources into a factory and it's filling up a storage bin and you see it increase in storage bins, like that inventory increase, I mean, that feels really good. You're like, yeah, it's working. This is like a dopamine hit, right? And then when you hook it up to other lines and then you notice that your reserve is dwindling down because you're not making enough, you panic, you want to fix it, right? You naturally want to fix it. And so like it becomes this game loop of like, how do I keep the numbers up? Like, I think that is the most basic mechanic fun part of Satisfactory. But like, how about you?
It's the sense of progression. I don't know if that goes into the numbers, but I really like that once I set up and establish something, then that works towards establishing other things. And it's like a feedback loop of progression. Every time I'm doing something, it's so that something else can come from it later. It's never just doing something so that it's just done and then I never do anything with it again.
So a sense of discovery, almost.
I don't know if I'd put it a sense of discovery, but it's like I get the same kind of feeling from that when I play games like a shopkeeping game, where every time I buy a product, I know that it's going to be sold to someone so that I can make money so that I can buy more products. And it's like, it's just the feedback loop. Is that what it would be?
Well, it's all feedback loops, right? But what you're describing is that process, is that game flow, right? That the idea of, I have a resource, what can I do with it? I could do these things, and then these things are useful for something else, and then I'm going to, like, that's that sense of progression you're talking about. Now, is there a specific term for it? I mean, feedback loop is probably the best. Gameplay loop is probably, pretty good too, right? But this is why I wanted to ask, right? So for you, the fun part there is being able to, if you think about it in steps, the first step is you get a resource. Second step is you turn that resource into something else. Then you have this new resource, which you can then turn into something else, which, that's your game loop. It's like a 2 to 3 step game loop. For Satisfactory, the design gets a little bigger because it's a matter of how do we make it? What other materials do we need? So you add complexity to the game by requiring two sets of resources, right? And that's only the building part of it. There's also resource gathering, there's transportation, there's all these other elements that all contribute to that same initial game loop, that same game feel. Like this is what the game is, right? And then what's fun is how do I do that efficiently? How do I do that quickly? How many more things can I do? What can I do with these other new things? And oh, look it, here's a brand new building that completely changes this whole dynamic because I don't need that material. I have a different recipe, which changes how I can make a material, which means I now have different build options and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But that's important. It's important to know, like that's to distill down that that's really what you like. So we're talking about a simple game here. I think that an idle game is a good candidate. They're fairly simple to, or a clicker game, if you will, would be very simple to implement, where you can click, you gain +1 water, and then from there you have an inventory of +1 water. So now we could figure out some sort of design or something we want to do around building that up into a concept. So that would be my suggestion, right? There's a clicker game, very small. We could do a building simulator game. They're bigger, but we also can keep the scope really small, right? That's potential.
See, I went a completely different route when I was trying to come up with some basic game ideas, where I was thinking like a 3D platformer, because from the tinkering I've been doing in the Unreal Engine, like most of it's pretty simple to put together for that. At least it feels that way so far. There's maybe something like a puzzle game where it's just like interacting with different objects so that it changes something that allows you to move on to the next area. There's so many different ways and routes this could go. At first I'm like, yeah, it's simple, right? We'll just come up with something that's probably like a 3D platform or whatever. We'll just go for it. But now it's just like, wait a minute, there's so many different things we could do. And it honestly feels a little overwhelming.
It does, right? And this is kind of like the hard part of doing those like 7 steps of whys and hows, where you realize just how, like a tree, right? You just realize how many branches there actually is from this thing that you started from. But that's important because it allows you to look at them a little differently, right? So you said a 3D platformer. I think that, and this is my own personal opinion, I think that right now the state of the beginner to maker, right, player to maker transition, you're always told make a 3D platformer. Like that's kind of been like the go-to response for years, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But here's the thing. Do you play a lot of 3D platformers? Like, do they captivate you? Like,
some of them do.
Some of them do. But what I mean is, do you spend the same kind of hours that you do in some of the other genres that you play in 3D platformers? Now, this is a tough question because you're going to be a little biased because you're a streamer, so you naturally are motivated, or how should I say, put in a position where you have the motivation to finish a game fully and explore it, right? But if you're thinking about the times when you're not on stream, you're just playing for fun, would you play, let's say, Donkey Kong Country, any of them, right, for the same amount of time that you played Satisfactory?
It's hard for me because when I think about these kinds of games and like the ones that I play off stream and on stream, for me, it's more of like the emotional connection that I felt to that game over more than anything else. Like one of my favorite games of all time, and it's something that I will go back and play forever and ever and ever, is A Story About My Uncle, which is a 3D platformer that had a very strong and powerful narrative that just, well, I don't know if I should even say it's a strong and powerful one. It was just subtly the way that it was presented through like the voiceover as I was playing through the game. Like the game touched me on an emotional level that no, I would never spend the same amount of time playing that as I would Satisfactory. But I think that's also because a game like Satisfactory is designed to be played for a much longer time. But
and that's kind of where I wanted you to go.
But if I was told I could only play one or the other, genuinely, I would put down Satisfactory, and I would keep A Story About My Uncle with me.
So I'm glad you like your response is great, and it illustrates how understanding what you're trying to achieve with your game is super important, right? If we're aiming to do something with a bit of an emotional connection where somebody could really connect with our game, it fundamentally changes the kind of game that we would end up making. Nobody's going to connect with an idle clicker or a tower defense or
unless maybe that's the thing that we're like, let's do something crazy.
maybe that's very possible, right? But the complexity involved in that is quite high, right? The amount of expertise that you and I would need to have in terms of how to tell an engaging story is very high. We have to be able to tell that in a manner where the main method that somebody, and I'm talking like from a clicker game, right? Like, just so we're both in the same mind space here. The main method of interaction is I clicked and I received a result, and I can do something with that result, or I can click and get more of that result, right? That's the main point of interaction. And that is really, really difficult to attach an emotional feeling to. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. It's quite possible that we could do something like You Have a Sick Mother, and like you're doing this idle gardening game where you're collecting and growing herbs, trying to find the correct recipe to create an antidote for her, right? And so the whole game is just about you going outside into the garden, clicking on your plant, harvesting your plants and planting new plants, and then going inside and putting different recipes, putting them together to see what they make, and then giving that to your mother to see if she like how it affects her, right?
Yeah, or it's like your mother's on life support and with a disease that's slowly getting worse, and you have to balance spending resources to help her while also keeping everything else going, because you got to have you need the income, so you need to put on that, but you also need to keep her alive.
Oh. So it's possible, but immediately we're already detracting from that main clicker style gameplay, right? So if we wanted to strictly constrain ourselves to that mechanic, we have to present all this information through animations, cinematics, UI, right? Like we're gonna open up the garden and it's just like this lovely backdrop with like a garden UI, right? And then when we go inside, it's gotta like let's say have a nice fade, and then now we fade and we're at like an alchemist table with a petal and more, mortal and pestle and all that kind of stuff, right? And then the next UI is maybe just like a sick lady with like the little thing on her mouth and she's like on a bed, and then you're there with her, and then you have to like click on things to basically do maintenance with her right through the UI, and then give her drugs, and then see how that changes her stats, and then you have to redo that whole process day in. And then if we really want to lean on that emotional connection, we could put a time limit on it and say, this isn't a forever idle game. This is you have 3 months of game time or, a year in game time to find the correct formula to save your mother, right? Like that could be pretty powerful when you think about how a player might actually spend all that time growing all these herbs and trying to find this formula. And if they don't succeed, that's kind of crushing, right? That's all that time is wasted, but that's a very powerful story to share. So it's not impossible, but it's important to constrain yourself, because this is the scope we're talking about. Like what is the fundamental idea we want to stick with here?
Because the more we talk about this, I think the more I know that there's certain things that are important to me in a video game that I really connect with, but for a first video game, I don't think it's something that should be a focus. I don't think I'm at a point with making a video game where I would be able to build something that's fun and also do the strong emotional connection, because I haven't done either of those yet. And I don't want to focus on, I don't think I should be focusing on two things I don't know how to do. I should just be focusing on the one thing.
Which is amazing, because this in essence is managing your scope, understanding what you're capable of and what probably lies outside of it. So as much as that idea might sound fun, right? It sounds like that could be pretty cool. Yeah, understanding the limitations and pulling back. This is exactly what we and everybody else should be doing, is like looking at that idea and saying, does it fit in the constraints of what we can do and what do we want to do? And that's something I think that, what is the goal of this idea, this game? This that we want to make? Is it just a learning exercise to finish something, or is it something that we want to be able to show it off? Like, let's call it a portfolio piece, right? Something that you could show to somebody and say, hey, I made a game.
I think for myself coming into this, I didn't really think of it as a portfolio piece. I think I saw it as a stepping stone into the games industry, something to be able to say, hey, I made a game. I learned certain parts from it, and now from this, I will be able to make something more.
I do want to point out there that you just said you don't think it's a portfolio piece, but I want it to be a stepping stone into the industry. And so that's when I. Let me finish my thought. Let me finish my thought.
Okay.
That's something a lot of new people say, right? Is, well, it's not going to be big and flashy. If I may, I'm assuming that when you say not a portfolio piece, you're saying, well, I don't want it to be something that's like super big and polished and like impressive. I want to point out that in the games industry, you will not get hired into a position because the thing in your portfolio is big and fancy. You're hired because you understand the process and you can execute on it. Because think about it. If how the general public thinks about a portfolio piece, like, and I'm assuming most people think the way you do, because that's what I've heard from a lot of people, even students, right? That's how they think about a portfolio. If that was the case, how could 3D artists get hired? They couldn't, because they just have a model. Like, what's so impressive about that, right? So you have to really think about it differently. Is the goal is to show you can build something, get it done, and you understand how it was built. That's the core essence of a portfolio piece. It doesn't have to be a finished product. It just has to show that you understand the process. So keeping that in mind, having something that's a stepping stone is perfect for your portfolio. Like, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I never really thought of that as something that would fit for a portfolio, because I still would like for it to be a finished product, and I would like it to look good. Like, I don't want it to be some janky thing where you see like the checkerboard textures and stuff like that. Like, I want it to be done. But I guess in my mind, when I think of portfolio piece, my mind immediately goes to something that's just where you've poured your heart and soul into like a specific part of it, so that specific part looks incredible and looks amazing. And then that, to me, that's what's like a portfolio piece feels like it's supposed to be.
Like a showcase.
Yeah, where it's just like someone's like, yeah, I put this all in the game, and then you look at it on the portfolio and it's just like one small section of a level. Or maybe like let me rephrase that to, like, instead of showing the whole room and how, you can go in through the door and you can interact with stuff, it's just like, here's a corner with a bookshelf and it's the best bookshelf you'll ever see. That's what I always thought of as for like the portfolio pieces, not just like a whole level where it's got some stuff working and it looks okay and it, it works and operates, but it was just like, no, you like hyper focus in on specific things.
Both are good, right? Both are good. But a showcase is something that it takes time. You have to have experience. And I think a lot of juniors, new people in the industry, trying to get into the industry, they really struggle because they feel like they can't have a showcase. Like, they're just not at that level. right? So it's a barrier, a mental barrier that stops them from even moving forward. But also it's a barrier in the opposite sense, in the sense that if you applied to work at my company and you showed something that was a showcase, and I'm like, this is not showcase quality, what that tells me is that you don't understand, right? Like fundamentally, you don't understand that what you're producing is not showcase material. And that's not good either, because that means that if I were to hire you as a junior, that means I now have to basically undo whatever mental, I'm going to call it brainwashing just because it seems catchy, but whatever mental brainwashing has led you to believe that what you did should be presented as a showcase, because showcases are meant for professionals. Showcases are meant for somebody where you're like, no, I'm super adept at what I'm doing. Look at what I can do for you, right? So that when I look at a showcase, I'm looking at what that person can bring to the table for me that I need them to build. But when you're new, I'm not looking for that. I'm not looking for that. No company is. When you're new to the industry and you're a junior, what we're looking for is, we had a different guy give us a showcase. He's got a process on how to do it. Can you follow that process? Do you understand how he made those models, that bookshelf in the corner? Can you follow along and you know all the terminology to appropriately build the textures and the modeling and all the topology and everything else? Can you do that? Because if you can, great. He's the guy that's going to get you to that quality, but you're going to do it his way. That's really what a junior is. So you have to show a portfolio, right? A prototype. You have to show that beginning process to say, look I'm not Da Vinci, but I understand color theory and I understand how to make like distant objects a little bit faded blue because of, atmosphere. I understand that. That's great. I know how, as a company, I could use you. And that's good. And that's where your sites should be. They should be around, how do I create a small portfolio piece that demonstrates I understand the basics of game design? Because you're not going to be expected to build the entire game. You're going to be expected to design one small piece of it as a junior. As your first job, you're only expected to do so much. Not everything, right? Just a little bit. Please do this a little bit really good, because we got like 100 of you and we're trying to do it all the same and we're trying to coordinate. And a lot of people don't understand that side of the games industry. They think that you have to do it all. You all have to be great. You don't. You just have to be good at a part of it. If you can be a part of the process and do it well, you'll get in. But you have to show that.
What was just talked about there then, is that relevant at all for someone who has no interest in becoming like a junior? They're just in it to make their own video games, like they just want to be indie?
Well, of course it does, right? It's the same thing. It's just a different audience, right?
What do you mean by a different audience?
Well, when you're trying to get a job in the industry, your audience is me and other people like me. Owners, producers, managers, people who are going to be trying to figure out how to make you a part of the process, because we got a big thing to build, right? But when you're an indie, like what you're building, who's it go out to? It goes out to the gamers. It goes out to the community, right? So really what you're doing, and this is way too complicated now, so I'm only going to like touch, is you're trying to be like me and others in positions like me. That's what you're trying to do in the indie space. Now, do you have to go through the whole building up an experience and a portfolio in the industry and everything else? No, you don't have to. Is it helpful? Sure. But again, there are plenty of developers out there who make a game and it does really well. And then they go to make another game and it does okay. And they make another game and it does all right. And they make another game and it does really well. And they've made like 7 or 8 games and they just make games for a living and they're an indie developer. Like, it doesn't really matter, right? It's just understanding that, like, where are you coming at this from? And for you, if it's not to get into the industry, it's just about building a game, understanding the process, being involved.
See,
right?
I think, yeah, because earlier when I said get into the industry, when I worded that before that, I think we had different looks at what I meant by get into the industry.
But that's okay, because everybody's going to be in the same position. right? Everybody who's listening to this probably has their own definition of what that means. So, but it's important to figure it out, to dissect it. And more importantly, this is a nice dynamic we didn't plan on talking about, but understanding who you're working with. In this case, we're not solo developing. I mean, we could take our own approach at whatever we decide to do and see how the results work, or we could work together, but I don't know you. You don't know me, hypothetically, right? So we should get to know each other. And so this is part of the process too, is while we're hashing and brainstorming this stuff out, we got to figure out, what does this terminology mean to you? How do you feel about certain things? Where's the direction you want to go? Personally, I have struggled on a lot of smaller projects because I am more business oriented, right? I'm more about, how do we develop this? How do we focus on this? How do we develop in a sense that's good for marketing, to push it out there, to build a product, to achieve success as a studio, right? And so I've learned to kind of rein that in a little bit, but I'm always thinking about that, like long term, not just making a game, but what do we do with it, right? A lot of the people I work with are just about the game part, and then they make a game and they don't know what to do with it. And I'm going to hesitate to say you're probably in that realm, which is fine, because if you need exposure.
Yeah, from my experience and the way I've approached everything so far, I would 100% fit right into that realm.
Yeah, and ideally you need a bit of both whenever you're making something with a serious intention. And I'm going to float that now. I'm going to say that whatever we're doing or we plan to do, we're doing it with the serious intention of building whatever we're talking about here, showing the process, and actually putting it on the market. We'll put it on Steam. Now, I'm not building this to make millions of dollars, but I'm doing it with a serious effort to show people this is how somebody like Spencer, right? Like a new person who wants to get into it. We're gonna go A to Z. We're gonna show this whole process. Here's the concept. Here's the building. Here's how putting it together. This is what a Steam page looks like. This is how we put together capsule art. And
as well as in, like, who's the target audience? What are we building for towards that? What are they going to like, not like? How does it influence the decisions that we make with it too? Like, I want to go the whole route with all that too.
That's good. And I think that, for us as a team moving forward on this, that's the important thing to stick to, and to remember that serious intent on doing this, it should be our driving goal, because it will get boring, right? just a little bit of foresight. It will get a little boring at times. There are going to be times where we're like, well, should we make the jump height, depending on what we're doing, or, the click rate, this speed, or that speed, or what if this is red and not blue? And there's a lot of tinkering that's involved in the game development process. But remembering that we're trying to get to that finished result, show the process, like that's going to be the thing that helps us get there, even through that hard, difficult stuff, right?
My initial thoughts is I would like to do something 3D. I think mostly because that's where I have the little bit of experience is with creating 3D models. And I feel like that could make the process easier to get into and make it to the end result, just because we're working in an area where I can't call it a strength because it's not. I'm a beginner, but if I look at all of my beginner knowledge, then that would arguably be my quote unquote strength, would be working with 3D models.
Okay. Well, that's a great start. So we know we want to do something 3D.
What about you? What would you like to see or work on or have as a part of the project? It's a weird question to figure out how to word.
It's doubly weird, because what we're doing now is me already doing it. Right? Is I want to talk about the process. I want to share the process. I like us going through this, talking about this, having this back and forth. That's the part that I like. I like showing people, like, hey, don't get overwhelmed by showcases for your portfolio. You don't need them, not to start. Like, I like talking about that. I like talking about the scope. I like helping people get started. So in essence, us doing this is me already doing it for the project. So when it comes to doing the actual work through the game, it's also hard because, at the start of the video, I mentioned I have a decade of experience. Well, my personal experience ranges from concept art to 3D art to environment art, character art, rigging, skinning, technical art, special effects. The only thing I haven't really touched is audio, right? I don't produce audio. There's always somebody else who does that. So I just I don't know, never really had to. I've been involved on the biz dev side of things, like marketing, working, publishing, concepts, validating pitches. The whole, like, I've done a lot in these last 10 years, so I can pitch in anywhere that's needed. Do I have a favorite? No, not really. I like working with people, but being a producer on such a small project isn't really that applicable. It's just you and me chatting, figuring things out. So it's very, very simplified, right? So I think that as long as we're targeting what you are and we're doing a good job about showing people how we're getting you across the finish line, right? That's what I care about. That's why I'm going to be passionate about. So we can do whatever we want. Sorry, that's not helpful.
If there's a direction that you think is good for us to go this, please take charge. Because my first thought now is like, all right, let's just start asking what ifs.
No, that's the perfect time. That's what I was getting into is right now we know, right? Just like as a recap for whoever or whenever, right? Is we know we want to do something with 3D objects. So my next question would be, do you have a preference of how? So what I mean is, are you considering navigating a world in a third person open environment? Or are you considering an isometric 2.5D top down or perhaps side scroller? Like, do you have a preference for how you interact with the 3D world?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Do you like the idea of seeing your character or just inhabiting the space of the character?
If we ended up going with something where it was like 2.5D or a side scroller kind of thing, then 100% it would be really important to to have a character of some sort. But if we can do something where we avoid having to create the model of a main character, I think that saves a lot of time and energy that could be spent in other areas that I'll probably find just as challenging for a first video game.
Okay, so what I heard was a first-person 3D game where we don't really have a character. We can't see character interactions. It's more of like we look around the world, and if we interact with an object, something happens. And maybe it's just like, for argument's sake, we click on like a microwave and then the door opens, right? Because that's very simple. That's something that's very achievable to animate a reaction for. But we're specific. We're intentionally leaving out an actual 3D character.
Yeah, I feel like for the base design, that's the right way to put it. And then if we ever had for the nice to list, if we did some later on, if we had like a simple, like a hand come up and like push a button or interact, like that would be a nice to, but I don't think that's needed. I don't think something like that is important. Yeah.
Well, we're not really ruling anything out at this stage, right? So this is kind of like an important thing I want to point out is we're not ruling anything out. What we're trying to do is we're trying to find the yeses, right? So rather than try not to focus too much on, or anybody doing this, don't focus on like the things that you have to account for later. All we're looking for are our bare minimum yeses, because yeses are much easier to find than no's. There's lots of no's, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to mention too that I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're not just coming up with the game idea right now. This is just one of possibly a few game ideas that we will probably think around doing.
What I'm trying to guide us to do is figure out what is the basic structure of whatever game we want to make. Because from what we just made, we could branch off and make a horror game. We could branch off and make a shooter game. We could branch off and make a 3D puzzle game. We could branch off and make a narrative exploration-based game. We could branch off and make a walking simulator. We could branch off and build like painting or a lawn care or like a power wash simulator, right? Those are all games of different genres, of different kinds that all fit into this small constriction. We like the small set of rules that we've created for ourselves. So the idea of the game right now is still very open. We can make anything, right? Right now, it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, well, your strength is in the 3D space. like you have, and I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit for it, but you have the understanding of like 3D spatial awareness. You have the understanding of not just how to model, but how things should look with perspective, and like all of that is going to contribute later, whether you know it or not. I know it, but right, I'm like, that's how it's going to play out. So even if we just stop there and say, okay, this is how this game is going to work, now we could do what ifs. Right, it's much easier to do what ifs now than if we like, because we can rule out like, well, we don't need a theme park builder or a city simulator. Those genres are out. Anything that's UI based, like an idle game or a clicker game, we can rule those out because they don't fit within the constraints we've set for ourselves. Which I want to point out for anybody listening, the constraints we've set are based off of our strengths, right? They're based off of stuff that we think we can do. So anything that doesn't fit in there, that's not a yes, we just say it's a no and chuck it and keep going.
Is it fine to start asking like the what if questions, or is it better for us to continue like going on this route of like starting to not like I guess like narrow in? And
I personally find it's better to do mix and match. So we started with a bit of constraints, and I think that's good because there's a lot of ideas, right? Like I said, there's a lot of no's. There's a lot of things that we could consider. And then if we ask our 7 hows and whys for every step, or every 6, right? That's a lot to consider, and that's where a lot of people get stuck. But it's much easier if you just lay down a few ground rules, right? Like I said, 3D, first person, simple interaction, thing happens, focus on mechanics over animation feedback, right? Like that's where we kind of have agreed. That's where we've distilled as going to be the important parts of whatever we're going to make. So now it's time to think about like, what does it look like? So yeah, setting some constraints is great. Now we could do some what ifs because it's easier. We've ruled out half the things we could possibly make. Now it's less daunting. It's also easier because if we get hung up on an idea that doesn't fit what we've set aside as constraints, we should be comfortably telling ourselves it doesn't fit. So we'll just move on. There's no sense pounding a square peg in a round hole, right? Like we're just going to end up miserable.
So you said you've never done anything with audio mixing before. So what if we made every sound effect in the game? Like all of the sound effects were made by us. And this could be going too far into the thought process, but like what if we have a slight overarching narrative of this game where it's like it's like someone is retelling the events of what happened. And so to make it easier for us to do the sound effects, it's like you were sitting down with your kids to tell them a bedtime story. You're telling them about what's going on, and then you're also making the sound effects for the kids as it's happening. And that gives us a way where we can do all the sound effects, we can mix the stuff together, but it also gives us breathing room where it's intended to be done in a way where they're not going to be perfect. So like if a car is driving by and we go like if we make a sound effect like that, it would fit within the narrative of it so that it doesn't feel out of place.
So to lean a little bit away from mechanics, right, in process, if I were to paraphrase what you said as, what if we made a game where it was being told to you by a narrator, quite literally making all the sounds, all the audio is from the narrator. Would that kind of like sum up what you were thinking?
Yeah, 100%.
That's a neat idea. Like now, what does that look like? Because that could be anything. We could make a story about a grandpa who's like hunting in the woods, and he's like, and then there was the deer, clomp, 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 and then I readied my bow, and I let the arrow fly, whoosh, ping, and I missed. And you're right, like so like that's something it could be. But is that a story that we want to do, or what if we're telling a horror story in that format? Like what if we're trying to describe all the scary sounds and it turns out to be more of a comedy than a horror, because your the narration is funny. But the in-game world, we could make really scary. We can have somebody sitting on a computer in a bunch of cubicles, and they hear stuff happening, but what's being described to us is the narrator making all the audio, and we just cue the events in story where it's like there's like, and there was an eerie scraping sound, and then we have we have like a broom being scraped against a wall or something, right? Like that's kind of funny.
So it's kind of like someone's trying to tell a really scary story, like a really scary bedtime story, but the kids or whatever listening to it are just like, no, this is not scary at all. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, like a terrible campfire story, right? But we're actually showing the visuals. But
and then even have moments where whoever the story is being told to, they can even ask questions where it's like, I don't like that. Could it be this instead? And and then things change visually or make adjustments based on the what's requested by like whoever's having the story told to them.
Yeah, so that's a neat idea. I don't think it's too big for us because that story could be however long we want to make it. So we can just do something very simple,
as complex as we make it too.
Yeah, it could just simply be a story about a dog, or maybe not a dog, or like a basketball, or some kind of object-oriented thing that doesn't require a lot of animation. My mind obviously went horror. I do a lot of horror-based work, but horror is nice that way because you don't need characters or creatures. You could just, and the door creaked open slowly, and then we just animate a door rotating in 3D space, right? It's much easier to implement on that side, but it doesn't have to be that. We could do anything, right?
If we went that route, it'd be kind of interesting to do one where it's like not like straight horror where like something's stalking you, but something that's, I guess it's like kind of like floats back and forth between horror and thriller.
Who knows, right? Like this is the whole point of thinking about the ideas and like what could you do with it? What could be fun and interesting, and what's something that appeals to us? Is
this like the right route that we should be taking for starting with this, or is there other stuff that we should be thinking of first?
Well, you know, the hard truth is that it depends. Like if you were in a AAA setting, like, no, this is not the right way to do it. You'd start with like full on architecture system. Like this is how our company builds things. But obviously that doesn't apply to indies, right? So like we're way less constrained about how to get started, right? To step into this role, and how we're doing it now, I think is important. Like it's important to just think about the ideas and what's interesting and what's fun, and just let it, as we're talking about it, let it kind of like come to a simmer, right? And be like, oh, well, I'm not a big fan of a horror, but what if I tried it? Like what you were doing, like that's good because it presents things in a perspective that's kind of unique to what we are doing and not what is genre specific. Right? We're not letting the industry dictate what is a spooky story. We're putting ourselves in a situation of like, okay, we have this neat idea where everything is done through a narrator or through us. Maybe we make a game where we have little plastic guns that go pew, 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 right? And it's just this very simple, like we run around and try and shoot each other, right? Networking a very small game like that is something I can do and show people how to do. That's very easy. Just peer-to-peer, right? But is that kind of where we want to go with this? Like, that's funny, but if it's not something that feels like it sticks for either of us, then we don't have to worry about it, right? But this is that time to think about it. And when we find something that sticks, like this horror aspect, what about it is it that you find interesting? Like, is it not that you necessarily want to do something overly scary, but maybe the story is about the monster under the sink, which turns out just to be like a carburetor that turns on in the middle of the night or something. But the little kid doesn't know, and the uncle is just being a bit of a twat and is like trying to spook out the kid, and it ends up not working at all. And then that was the plan all along, was the uncle was just trying to like make something scary sort of silly by making all these funny sounds and presenting this story about the monster under the sink he found. And then it's not a big deal, right? Like, who knows? Alternatively, you also had a different idea that I thought was interesting, where you said where like somebody interrupts and says, oh, I don't like that. So what if we created a story where it's like a kid in the woods. You are the kid in the woods, and this person's like narrating the story to you, and this is a depiction of what you are imagining listening to the story. So as you're going and it's like, it was a dark and stormy night. It's like, no, I don't like lightning. And it's like, okay. And then we could just have 3D modeled dark clouds. I go, and then the sun comes up. It's like, it was a midday in the spooky forest. It's like, oh, well, can there be flowers? And it's like, okay, let's restart. It was a bright and sunny day. And then and we can animate. Like, I could teach you how to do it in Unreal, but we could take very simple, because if we do this child's interpretation, it could be very simple models that don't require a lot of 3D expertise, just popping out of the ground. We just go boop, 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 boop along a path, and it's like, okay, are we happy with the setting? And we could bug a friend of ours or somebody to do the voiceover for a little girl or a little boy or something, and be like, yeah, this is great. And it's like, what happens next? And it's like, and then we go back into the narration where it's like winding the bend, or et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. They come across a spooky well, and then right, and then so we could unfold how maybe there's a voice or something coming from the well, and so you're trying to, now the story is the narrator is trying to convince the kid to go closer to the well, and so now what we're doing is something akin to Stanley's Parable, but in a different format where it's all about that comedic interaction of these two characters, and we're just seeing a depiction. But we just play audio tracks when a player gets to a certain point in the game that requires a track to play. So like if there's a well and we present no way out of this forested area except to go to the well, we could set up a situation where if a certain time doesn't happen where you don't go to the well, we could have a narration play, just a dialogue that says, well, I don't want to go to the well. I don't think he should go to the well, right? That's complicated, but to step back a bit, we also don't have to do that, right? We don't have to give full agency to the player to determine how a story could play out and all the interactions we have to do. We could just force them to play along in the story. So they have to go up to the well and interact with it. And then the story continues. And it's like, deep from in the well, there came a deep, raspy voice. And then, no, I don't like that. That sounds scary. It's okay. Deep inside the well came a voice. It's like, well, why does it have to be a voice? And why is it in the well? So there's lots of dynamic we could play with there. That's not technically complicated.
Genuinely, from all the stuff we've talked about so far, to me, that sounds the most fun. My big focus too, while we're going through this still, is I'm trying to think like what's something simple, but we can be more complicated with it at certain points if we would like. And that kind of meets that criteria for me right now. Like, this is something where we could go through and build the basic part of the game, where it's like, here's the starting point, here's the ending point, and then we could just go back to certain moments and be like, you know what? I think it would be cool to add this little extra little adjustment here, or this one here.
So I thought that was a really neat idea. And I think that I just want to like put on our Indie Innovators hat here for a moment. And I want to call that detail out for people, is that like, this works better when you have somebody you can converse with. But pay attention for moments like that, because there's a lot. People have a lot of great ideas while they're working, and it's not just designers. I've caught little butterflies in wind as art director I worked with, Cleveland, once mentioned. That's how we called them all the time. Oh, people have butterflies in the wind, and then it's a great idea, and then they're in the wind, they're gone, and then you forget about them, right? So I think paying attention for those little things where it's like, hey, that sounded neat, and bringing attention and focus to that for a moment allows those ideas to just stick around a little longer and stew, and just to be like, okay, is there something more here to this idea? Or maybe it is just maybe it's not a butterfly in the wind. Maybe it's a fart in the wind, and then it's gone, right? Then we'd like, glad it's gone. But no, I do like that idea as well. I like that idea of almost like a child's, not even necessarily a child, but a person's interpretation of a story that's unfolding. So the world that we are presenting to players is that interpretation, and then their guidance is the narrative that's being told to them. From what you were talking about, ease of implementation, yeah, there's plenty of opportunities for us to go through and create our story that we want to tell. And then if we can find moments throughout it to sprinkle in funny little side loops, that is not hard to plan for in development, because our main mechanics that we're working with are basically navigation in 3D space and location based audio triggers. That's like the main mechanics of this game, right? Unless we take it a step further, where the story that we write requires, like you said, a mechanic. Maybe that's sneaking, maybe that's being able to pick up a 3D coin in space, not with our hands, but like in typical like a Skyrim fashion, where it's just the object that floats, and then we have to put it in the well to make something happen, right? That allows us room to be creative down the line if we come back and we say, well, what if we also, instead of a coin, what if there's just like a crumpled piece of paper that people could find, that's like not right at the well being spoon fed to them, but maybe we put a bench or something on like a little bit beside the woods away from the well. And if players are exploring and they find this piece of paper and they notice they can pick it up in the same fashion, what happens if they put that in the well? That gives us an opportunity to expand on it, but it's not necessary, is my point, right? Because how we would code that would be when we interact with an object and then we drop it in the well, we could just check what object fell in the well, what hit that trigger inside the well. Was it a coin? Was it a piece of garbage? Was it a wood? Was it, did the player try and jump down the well and that's the end of the story? It's like, oh, and they died. Oh, that's a terrible story. It's like, okay, and then the level restarts, right? Like that is a very simple mechanical system, if you will. Like that's simple to implement, but it gives us a lot of room for creativity. So that could be an option.
Before we go too much on this, can we try brainstorming like just something completely different as well?
Absolutely.
I feel like we could, at the very basics, call this the walking sim. How complicated do you think stuff with like a 2D side scroller with fighting and combat is on like terms of like first game? Is that something that with no experience is going to be kind of challenging, or is it something that it's kind of with a little bit of work you can pick it up?
If you keep it simple, and by simple I mean if I left click, I want an animation to play, which is like a sword swings. And if the sword, let's say, overlaps, right? Collision, if it detects another object, we want to know what that object is. And if that object is a enemy, we want it to die. Let's keep it super like Ghost and Google's simple. That's not hard. And that's actually a pretty good challenge to get started with understanding like hitboxes and defining things off of what kind of actor they are and what you want to happen. That's a pretty good goal. Is that hard? I mean, no, I think it would be a challenging to learn how to understand how to make it the first time and how to look up the information to go about making it. But I think it's acceptable for a new game. When you say 2D scroller, the other thing I just want to call out there is the 2D scroller is just a perspective, really, right? If we're not talking, I'm speaking in terms of genre, not art style. It could still be 3D. It's just our presentation of this 3D world is in a 2D perspective. It's just like flat looking at the world. So that allows us to still do our 3D skills, and ultimately that could save us time, because if we modeled, let's say, a tree, it allows us to rotate that tree in 45 15 degree rotation, and it looks like a different tree. We don't have to redraw a tree 30 times to have variety, right? So it's not bad to keep it 3D. We're just going to show it as a 2D world, which could be doable, or it could be 2.5D, a locked camera that's still side scrolling. So I kind of just wanted to point that out. But yeah, like simple 2D side scroller game, and with a simple attacking mechanic, I presume jumping, right? The jumping
Yeah.
mechanic. Um,
The first thing that comes to mind is something kind of a little silly, like the adventurous adventures of Gent Gentry or something like that, where it's just this kind of over the top story of a knight that just he starts on one side and your goal is just to get all the way down to the other, and he has to do maybe he has to like fight a couple things along the way. There's like a sword and a stone that he goes to interact with, but he's not able to pull the sword out, but then finds another sword, then picks that up, and then people go, oh, you got the sword out of the stone, and he's just like, oh yeah, and then it just like it starts out like on the far left side it's his humble beginnings, and on the far right it's like how the tales of everything he does gets completely over exaggerated as he goes. How do I describe it? Instead of it being the tale of like a story of how he got from point A to point B, it plays along as where we see things that happen or that he's a part of and that happen, and then how when he gets to the next spot the tales are just like over exaggerated from, and it's like he somehow becomes a legend by the end of it. A lot of it's kind of like a walking kind of thing as well too, but with like little interactable things to like maybe solve some minor puzzles. It's like people are really afraid of something in a cave, so he goes in to deal with it, and it turns out it's just a little mouse, but the sounds that it makes just get echoed throughout the cave, so it sounds like a roaring dragon. So that when he comes through on the other end, he just is able to like, maybe he's also, maybe the reason why he can't do anything about it is because he just, something happened at the beginning and he like got punched in the throat and now he can't talk or something. I have no idea. It's just like, sorry, I feel like I'm rambling now, but
no, it's good. It's an interesting concept. So it's basically taking the hero's journey and then poking fun at it, really, to be like, oh, it's Doug from the village who came on to be king, but really he just like a series of coincidences that got like blown out of perspective. I think what would be challenging about it, because I like the idea, but I think what would be challenging is the presentation of that part. Is how do we, like, if we broke it up into levels. Level 1 is, let's say it's a medieval setting and his mom says, our broom broke, I need you to go into the woods and find me a straighter stick for the broom, right? And a nice sturdy stick. And so like the adventure is you crossing the farmland to get to the other end to get a stick, and in the process, I don't know, you spook like some coyotes or something, and when you come back it's like, oh, he rescued the town from like the hungry wolves that were there to eat the cattle, and it turned out to just be like a coyote or something like in the woods stuck, right? Like what you're saying. But where do we make that funny? Is it in the sense that how the character is reacting? Is that in that he's like celebrated in the town, and it's not so much that he can't explain the story. I think it's how do we present it, right? And then this is going to lead into other parts where we're going to switch from what if to constraints. That's a lot of characters potentially, right? Or do we maybe not have characters at all, and it's just kind of like we zoom in a little bit on the character and he just kind of like shrugs while like we just play clapping sounds and cheering, right? So it's like, how do we present that perspective that gets at that essence of what you're talking about? Because I like that idea. I like the idea of like a tall tale, right?
I feel like something like this mocking up like visual examples of how the story might be told would be a very, like the other story we wouldn't need, like our other day I don't think would need something like that, but I think something like this would need visual mock-ups to like play around with the ideas to see like how would we do this, how would this work, or is that our thinking too far ahead into the stage of the planning for this?
I think you're transitioning out of the indie space now. Truthfully, I think that based on my professional experience, this is the time where you usually see teams come together to try and create ideas. Like, we need to present this idea to sell it, right? And I don't mean to sell it as a product for people to buy. I mean in terms of we have to sell this to the game director, the studio, to the rest of the team. Like, we really need something to help visualize this idea. And I think that if you are an indie or an indie team and it gets to the point where it needs that, you're no longer making an indie level game, because you have to pour time and resources into deciding if this is even an idea worth doing. And you and I can spend all day, we can spend all year doing this, right? It's not a big deal. But I want to put the constraint on that we're somebody who seriously wants to make a game for the first time. And this is a good way to look at it from a scope production side to say, okay, does it take more to explain the idea than us just talking and trying to visualize it? And if it does, it's too big. That would be my perspective. So if we can't find a way to present this just talking in an easier fashion, then yeah, it's going to take a lot more work. And the way to think about it is in like exponentially. So the production of building a game, and if we think about how I talked about how to build that reactive narrative game, it was very straightforward in how we could build it and how we could expand on it. But I'm already struggling with how do we present that comedic following the story and how the character, like, how does that play out, right? Because that's difficult now in a concept phase, you just need to assume it's going to be like 10 times harder, 6 times harder, or like 50 times harder to actually develop for it. So if it's hard to, and what I mean by that is we can't just simply put in dialogue, right? It wouldn't be as effective as the other idea we had. Because we see the character and we see the world, we're going to expect to see the mom asking him to go on this quest. We're going to expect to see the mayor celebrating this person and just getting the story wrong. We're going to expect to see that. So now we have dozens of characters we have to model, all their reactions. We need the audio for all those characters. So you can see very quickly the scope of this simple 2D scroller got blown way out of proportion, right? So what if you go instead, we pull back and say, okay, well, we like the idea of the tall tale. How do we avoid those issues? What if we don't hear about any of the tales until the end? So we go through this game, and it's kind of silly, and he goes through these, like you said, these small conflicts that are poking fun at the hero's journey, where he's just a brat, and he got sick, right? And he's coughing, and that's why he can't talk. And so he goes through this journey of, he found the stick, and then he had to like fight off a wolf, and then he found this little girl who's like lost in the woods, but not really. He's just like helping carry her basket of flowers that are too heavy for her, right? But that's what the next town over thinks is, oh, she was lost, and she wasn't. She was just struggling to get this thing home. And then you play through the entire thing as the story of just like this, I don't know, maybe it's the village idiot. That's why he can't talk, where he goes through all this stuff. And at the very end, he like finally gets home, and there's like the knights are there, and like the king is there to give him this prestigious award. And he's like only been doing small little tasks that then build up into this huge story. And it's like us as the player are like, that's not what happened, right? That could be a funny way to portray that. And it would be a lot easier too, right? It's a way to still keep that idea, but also make our workload way simpler. That would be my take on it.
Gets all the way to the end where he's praised for all these incredible things and hailed as a hero, and then he finally returns home and his mom's like, did you get the stick?
Right.
I feel like in that situation, I'm getting away from the actual game design part of it, though, and I'm just kind of thinking about it as like a whole thing where it's like, what's the character going to interact with? What are they going to have to do to overcome it? Like, what are the core? I don't. Features isn't the right word, but what's the core things that the character has to do to make it a game, not just like a hold, write, and listen to and read a story.
Well, games are just an experience, right? And it's about the experience we want to tell. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're just bad and on purpose, right? So like, I think that while the interaction is necessary, it's not terribly important. And in the indie sense, I think it's important to stick to that game feel, like that experience you want to share. Because the moment you try to incorporate all those complicated things, like what's the interaction going to look like, what's going to hook players, what's going to be like the most appealing, like those things are good to incorporate, but they'll basically complicate your game if you're trying to think about all those things. Like, who's this audience for? We could think about that, and we will eventually. But if we're thinking about that right now, it becomes really difficult. And just like taking inspiration from your biggest favorite games, trying to think about your target audience too quickly will influence what you think you should be making because you want it to appeal to that audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that right now, just based off of what we were talking about, it seems like the core idea is that we want to do a simple side scroller, almost exploration narrative where we have key moments where the player needs to interact with an object or a character, right? Do very simple mechanics. And the selling point is that at the end of it, everything you did is blown way out of proportion that you had no idea of as a player or the character. And then you get home and it's like, oh, I got the key to the city. And then, yeah, did you get the stick? And it's like, oh no, right? Like that's funny. And that's where the payoff is, right? Everything else doesn't really matter. Like the mechanics and stuff right now doesn't really matter because the core idea is still funny, is what I'm getting at. So like, because that structure doesn't just have to be 2D, that could be 3D. It could, right? It could be a top-down game where we just have a character where we click on a world and we got to like go through all these, like that's presentation could also work with this game idea. It's just more like, what is the essence of the idea? Well, it's funny. We're presenting a simple game. It's just a little experience where you're going through the world and you're just like doing small things to help whoever or whatever you come across, but everybody else gets, the game of telephone, and you help that dog, and then all of a sudden you're a wolf tamer. Like that idea is funny in itself. How we present it does matter, but not quite as much as you might think. Now, I realized earlier I brought attention to how we would present going out and coming back, and the tall tale has been like blown up for like every level. Yes, mechanically, presentation wise, that would be too much. But if we save that to the very end, that's when it's okay. So I just want to, for those of who are paying very close attention to everything we're saying, and that sounds like I'm contradicting myself, I want to explain that's the difference. The difference of doing it every time, going out to like do small missions and coming back and building up this hero. Yeah, that's really hard. Doing one big long tail and then coming to the end to be like, oh, well, still a good payoff, much easier to implement. And that's how we control the scope, right?
So then the brainstorming we've done with these two different game ideas, is that good enough for like a starting point, or do we still need to break down those ideas more and go more into them before we're at a point where it's like we have two possible starting points? Which one do we want to pick?
I don't think it's necessary to break them down further, right? Because what we're trying to identify are game pillars. Like what's the essence that's going to hold up this whole game? And what I'm trying to show is it doesn't really matter how we go about it. We can always find a way to do it, right? As long as we stick to whatever this core idea is. The first one was a funny narrative that's being depicted in like a child's imagination, and maybe it's a spooky story that they don't like, right? That's a fun, interesting idea. That's the essence, is that narrative driven reactive world. And then this time, the essence of this is we're following somebody who's going through the hero's tale, but it's not actually, it's quite literally a tall tale, right? That's the essence of this, is that humor payoff. That's the essence. So whatever we plan out after we pick an idea, as long as it's in support of whatever the core idea was, it'll work. It's just a matter of whether or not we could do it with two people, right? That's later though. Right now, it's just figuring out, is this what this idea is? Is this what's like, we're both sitting here talking about this idea, this little spark. What is that spark? Can we figure out exactly what that spark is? And if we can, great. If we can't, maybe it's time to move on, right? And as we do two or three of these, maybe one of them is a little brighter than the rest, right? Maybe we just understand one more better than the other sparks, and that should be the one that we make. But that's the process here. That's really what we're trying to do. So we're trying to find spark. We're trying to see, like, how excited are we about it? Do we think it would be fun? Would it be fun to actually play this game? And then we can figure out the rest later, because we know that this is the identity of this of the game, this experience that we want to share.
I'd like to also come up with an idea for like an idle clicker as well, because then I feel like we've gone in a third different route from the other. This was one that you brought up as a good idea for like a starting game, so I think it'd be kind of interesting to flesh out one of these as well too, because I don't have tons of experience with them, but I know there's the occasional one that has quite hooked me as well. So when you hear idle clicker, what's kind of the first thought that comes to your mind?
Well, I mean, very simple game that's as I mentioned, is all about the numbers, right? Like that's really what the essence of those kinds of games are. It's just about growing the number. Big numbers and numbers going up make people happy. It's just like basic proven psychology, human psychology, like our lizard brain, right? It just appeals to us, which is why they're so successful and they're so easy to make. Is because, like I said, you click +1, +2, +3, +4, and then now it's all about how do we reinforce that feeling good. And I'm going to spend 5 clicks to make sure I get 1.5 clicks now every time I click. So I get to 10 even faster. And that feels really good too. And there's another upgrade. Oh, goody. And then that one costs a little bit more. And then it's these games, the struggle is balance over long term. But I don't want to approach this as something like that. It's just about building the core.
What if we built one that had a set endpoint? Maybe it's got different levels where you're collecting different things, but it's like it's slowly building up, and it's like there's multiple levels, each with a different evolution, where it's not like something where it's, oh God, I don't remember what it's called. I played it a long time ago, where I could be misremembering, but I think you started out as this tiny frog, and so you're and you're like eating different things, and so the frog is constant. Like once you've eaten enough, you expand, so you become a bigger frog, and the frog keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger until you're like eating. You go from like eating little bugs to eventually eating people, to eating like cars and planes and like missiles, until eventually like you get big enough that you're eating planets and solar systems, until you become like a whole universe itself.
I remember this. It was like on Newgrounds or like other Flash portals or something.
Yeah, and it was kind of like a Flash game. Yeah. Like that, I feel like an idle clicker that does some sort of or maybe not even idle clicker, but like a clicker game that does some sort of progression like that could be fun.
Well, what's hard about trying to come up with ideas with this kind of genre is that they're all like that, right? Like that's the essence of what they are, like bare bones. It's what are we layering on top of that could be fun? That's like in my original example, right? I think a fun twist is setting it up so there's an endpoint, like you're what did I say? Gardening, right? Gardening, and you're like growing herbs in a garden, and then with the goal of finding the right combination of herbs to cure your mother. And you have it's not about how big you grow the garden, how many different kinds of like plants you can make or combinations of formulas, etc. It's the only goal is about how do I get to the right one to cure my mother before she passes. That's the goal of the game. Now we can make it open-ended where like you can grow as big a garden as you need, and maybe how we make this process make sense is we incorporate a business element into it where you start off with like a green herb, right? And all the green herb is it makes your mother cooldown. Maybe it's mint, right? Like we don't even need to give it that kind of a level of description. We just say green herb makes her feel cooled down, right? And so we could say, okay, well, I'm going to farm green mint. And so the idle clicker game is all about growing the herb so that you can sell it after you've tested it. You know what it is. So it's like an apothecary shop. We incorporate the business element to it. So you sell the herb to get money, which then you could then go to a store and buy new herbs, new seeds, which you then plant, and you have to click them or idle grow them, collect them, put them in a formula. What do the blue herbs do? Well, they warm her up. Right? It's the opposite. And then now we can grow both kinds of plants, and then we can also sell those plants to get more money to grow more plants, right? You see that's that loop now where we're doing the idle and the clicking, where you're earning an income so that we could support the idle and the clicking at the same time. Now it becomes a management sim of how much inventory do I have to test with versus sell with, right? And all the while, we're not just trying to grow a massive herb empire factory. What we're trying to do is, and this is where it limits scope, because where idle clickers typically struggle is in the end game, which there is none, right? How do we keep growing the brick business until they're like building Dyson spheres? That's what they sell, is Dyson spheres, because we've grown from bricks all the way up into like intergalactic level businesses. Like there's no end, which isn't bad. That's why some people like them. But I think for us, for a new game, I think putting an end on it is better serving for us, because it limits the amount of work we have to do before we get to say, no, we seriously approach this as a game we could put out and put on, Steam or itch.io or wherever we decide we want to put it, and show that process for, right? That's a very finite amount of time, because realistically, like the amount of people who are going to download this game and be like, we need an end game. Like if it grew that big where we need to develop more content to serve the audience that's playing that game, great, we could deal with it then. But for now, we're two dudes. We're both new to the industry, more or less, and we're going to put out a game. Like that's the goal, right? So I think whatever it is, whether that's apothecary, sick family member simulator, or it's the business simulator, or whatever else, like I don't think it really matters as long as we decide what that endpoint looks like. Because in the family business side of it, maybe we take inspiration from the Walmart family, right? Where your mom and pop shop selling bricks and a new department store opens. So you're trying to sell bricks, make them and grow them and sell them or whatever, and then get new items to sell in your store to earn enough money to buy out the competition in like 3 months' time. Like that's the end goal, right? So just because I think that limiting the scope is really good for us. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's my perspective on it.
No, I feel the same with that. No, my mind keeps racing on different ideas for how we could get it to work. Like, so maybe the game is about you trying to find the medicine to cure your mom. But the only way you can try this other medicine is through this weird shifty company where they pay you for every herb that you feed your mom. And so every time you click, you're shoving another herb into her mouth. And it's like the premise is like you keep feeding her these herbs so that you can get sponsorship money from the company, so that it unlocks the next sponsorship tier so that you can try another herb. And so then the clicker starts out really simple where you're just feeding the one herb over and over and over and over, but then you'll unlock new herbs where now you can feed those. But sometimes, depending on the symptoms that your mom is showing, it's like you could just feed the same herb the entire time, it doesn't matter, but it's more efficient to like feed the other herbs. So it's almost kind of like got a little bit of the apothecary stuff in a sense where It's like maybe it's presented where it's done as a live stream, where you have a live stream where you're feeding your mom herbs to gain viewership and sponsor, so to increase your viewers, so you gain more sponsorship money, so you can unlock higher sponsorship tiers that'll give you access to new herbs. So at different times, certain ones would just give you more points, and you just look at how she appears, and that gives you the idea of that. There's no like indicator where it's like, now it's time to do these points. It's like, oh, she's turning blue, that means I got to give her this herb now, and oh, this one, she's growing goblin horns again, I got to feed her this herb to remove that side effect. So it's like the narrative of it, because again I'm focused on that, is you're trying to find the herb that's going to cure her sickness, but in the process you keep accidentally giving her other issues that you have to cure with other herbs until you can eventually get to the final one,
which is she turns into super mom and blasts out through the window or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's all presented as if you're doing it on a live stream, because then as you progress through the levels too, maybe there's a chat that that starts out like you would see with small streamers, and then as you get close, like higher and higher up in it, like the chat starts to get more effective and like explode, and then like with just like the messages of firing and just like how chats naturally progress with streamers as well, which I think might also be kind of interesting. Because then it also gives players something that while they're sitting there clicking, they can also just like stare at the chat and just weird things are being said, and just typical.
Well, it's a neat idea too, because you could take advantage of things like the different actions that streamers usually have. Like on Twitch, you could do like donation, like a little animation plays. Like we could do stuff like that, but it's like small boosts that maybe it's like extra cash or a short-term multiplier, or and then
you could like spend some of your sponsorship points to like adjust or modify your stream overlays or something like that.
Unlock like new bonuses and stuff.
Kind of like how, I mean, it's not how it actually works in streaming, but like how you would unlock a new overlay which would give you a bonus, but the bonus that the overlay gives you slowly diminishes over time, so then you've got to spend points to unlock a new overlay, like an even better one, and it like takes you through like stages that typically you see streamers go through as well with it.
Yeah, that could work. That's interesting. Yeah, because like listening to, I feel like the original idea I was thinking with that is actually probably better suited to like a Stardew Valley almost. Does that make sense? Like where I was going with it originally.
Well, there is I don't remember what it's called, but there's an idle clicker kind of like what you're talking about, where it was really successful and really popular, where you grew plants. And like that, I guess it was a side part of it, but it's like I think you were like feeding a void or something like that, and then you also had a gardening thing on the side where you would grow plants and like put them into these different things so that it would like grow up, and then or they would grow and you could harvest them and then feed them into it. But then like it would give you this grid based thing where you would place plants in different spots so that certain ones would occasionally crossbreed with each other and create new plants. And so you were going through this process of growing the plants to feed it, but also crossbreeding them to unlock new plants that would allow you to get other things. I can't remember what the game. I only saw a video on it on YouTube where a streamer was going through the process of like, I got like 1 billion points in it, and then they showed the breakdown of how they did it.
So it sounds like if we just say we stick with those three concepts, we got the narrative third person walking simulator, the tall tale side scroller, and the live stream idle clicker. Was there, out of those three, were there any particular one that kind of like jumped out at you?
I mean, they all are. I genuinely didn't think that we were going to have a setup where there's 3 different ones where I would be happy making any of them. But I think the first one still jumps out more to me. What about with you?
I kind of like them all. I was not expecting it either. I was kind of just sort of expecting to like settle on something like small and manageable, but I really like the narrative one. I think that's there's a lot of fun I think that could be had with that one. I think
that one probably also hits a little more home to both of us because, I mean, you have kids. I have a nephew that's now old enough that you can kind of do that kind of stuff with. And so I feel like something like that also hits a little differently for us versus if we were younger in our, our careers.
This is very true.
I think that narrative one would also be one where we could take advantage of the situations we're in, and we would be able to use. That sounds really bad. We could use my nephew, use your kids, but it gives us an easy thing where we can just talk to them about parts of it and then see how they react and what they like, and then from that can help builds more of like an authentic and interesting experience for it.
Yeah.
Where the other two games I think any one of the three we make could be just as good as the others, but that one we just have more stuff going on in our own personal lives too that'll help feed into it more than we could with the others, I think.
Yeah, and we talked about, I'm assuming we talked about in one of our earlier design podcasts, right? About how like a common thing that's shared with people sharing how to be a game designer is to take inspiration from your own life. And so like what you're doing is great. Yeah, I think that if we were going to try and pull inspiration from our own lives, I think that the narrative walking simulator by far, yeah, that's something we can both contribute to. But also the idle clicker, right? Because you do have a background in streaming and podcasting and doing that kind of stuff, whereas I don't. So like that's something that I could rely on you to be like, okay, you know the terminology, you know the lingo, right? How it all works, and like I can help program it and make it work, and so that like it's still very relative to at least something that you can bring expertise to. Where yeah, it does work well, and I feel like the weakest taking in that personal level of interaction is the side scroller, like because that one just feels like a fun idea, but not really very relative to anything.
It feels more of like an art project than like a successful video game.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, well, that being said, I think if we want to, because we've been chatting about this for a while, and this is gonna be quite a big episode, or maybe multiple parts for you.
I didn't expect. I think it should all. I think it should all be one episode. What I took home from this the most is when I originally threw together the idea for the episode, I was like, I don't know, half an hour, maybe we'll go a little longer and it'll be like 40-45 minutes. But like, even with basic structure of just like, yeah, this is what we're going to go for, this is how we're going to do it. Like it's not that simple.
No, and you know what? It never is. And I fully expected us to go for probably a good couple hours for sure. That's part of being a producer, but is expecting that extra time, right? But yeah, I mean, if we wanted to pick from just two, like narrow everything down, I think yeah, the narrative child's interpretation of a story with the narrator and the idle clicker are probably going to be our short list of what we should make. And I think moving forward would be actually doing the documentation around like a high concept, right? So now that we have this idea, we have a loose elevator pitch of where somebody asked us about what we were making, we could describe it in like a sentence or two. Now it's laying it out, all the stuff, and we kind of did it during this process, which is good during the brainstorming, but really laying it out and being like, okay, how would we present this world? How would audio work? How would the narration between two characters work? And maybe it's that overlapping of volumes, like you said, or sorry, I said, or maybe it's something else we do entirely. Maybe it's fully interaction based, or when it comes to the idle clicker, we can talk about what systems that do we want to have. Like there's the live stream we talked about feeding herbs as part of the clicker for generating the income, right? And then we talked about a different system, which is the using overlays to generate like temporary bonuses that you can add to your stream. What does that look like? Well, it's a whole new interface. Maybe we do like events like donation, and we have like a little gift thing that like hope your mom feels better donation, like 5 points or something, and we can randomize that, right? Another mechanic there that I made notes of that you talked about was a chat. I can share how to make a data table that's just a bunch of names and like a short message and maybe a value column. It's just a spreadsheet, but we can import that into a game, and I can show you how to randomly select from them. So we can grab a random name and then grab a random pre-made chat message that you and I make. And if we have another column for whether or not it's a benefit to the player, and then a dollar amount or a point amount, however we want to integrate that, and then we can set our frequency. So it's like when you're starting the idle game, you have very little chat engagement, or it's just like every minute that we just have one and there's no donation, right? It's just like, oh, what's this? And we could put all kinds of comments, and if we're being realistic, like good, positive, negative, wacky, just we could even put in people selling services, right? like there's a lot of stuff that you can draw on as a streamer that we could put in there to randomly populate it. And then what we can do is just change that frequency to be like, oh, the more successful you get as a streamer in streamer points in the ranking that we make up, the more active your chat is, which is just frequency. It just pulls random stuff from that data table. And the bigger the data table we make, the more varied that chat is going to look. And it won't matter when it's like spawning a message every like 0.1 second, because if it shows multiple same messages, that's what happens in live streams anyways. Like when they have a ton of people watching, there's tons of people just spamming the same stuff, right? So like that's how we could implement something like that. We could say that for next time, but I think really going through that process and talking about how that system should work, what are we going to call it? I think that's going to be important, as well as actually picking one of these.
So what should I prepare for next episode then? And anybody that might be following along with their own process, what's something they should be thinking about for the next step?
Well, the next step would be to kind of individually go through and just make notes on what they think would be all included in the scope of what it would take to make this game. Like how many interfaces, how many menus, how many game menus, what systems can we think of to implement it? And I always like to ask full teams to do exercises like this, because whether you're a one-person team or 7-person indie team or a professional team, everybody has their own unique view on things, right? So like if you think of all the stuff you want to bring to the table, it's probably going to be a little bit different than what I bring to the table. And I'm probably going to be more systems platform focused, and you're going to be more experience focused. In terms of like the idle clicker, you'll probably come back with a whole new system that you thought about. It'd be really cool to add this part of it because you have that background. Whereas I might be talking more about like how do we manage large scale numbers without having the computer crash, right? Like, so having those different perspectives is good, and that's a good starting point, especially given that there's two of us. So I would encourage you or anybody else just to take a sheet of paper or a notepad or Word document, whatever you like. I personally like doing physical media because it helps me be creative. And just very simply write it out. Just be like, what are all the parts that are included? I don't need to know or define how they work. I just need to think about what are all the parts that I think might, be a part of this game. And then just underneath that, add like in brackets, just very small note, point form, like why are you including it? So I'm including overlays because it's part of the bonus system, right? And just very quick on one sheet of paper, go through all the different things. And if you're making a small enough game, you shouldn't need any more than one piece of paper to very broadly outline all the core components. Later, when we start making these, you and everybody else will see, like, yeah, there's a lot more to it. But for now, we're just trying to gauge, okay, like what's the basic outline of this game versus the outline of the other game. And then we may like one idea more than the other, but when we put it down on paper, which one's actually going to be more like possible to make? Which one's more feasible?
This episode, we were able to come up with 3 different ideas that we are considering actually making our first video game on. And now the next step, as James said, is to go through and start really breaking these ideas down, which is exactly what we're going to get started in the next episode. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. And if you have any questions for things we've talked about in the episode, please ask, because James giving more insights on that stuff is also going to help me, and I would really appreciate it, which you can easily do through Twitter or Discord, or, I mean, there's links in the description down below. You can even email us, whatever works best for you.